When I'm in rooms with executives and I ask them, has anyone replaced a single worker with AI? No one ever raises their hand. If you are focused on revenue generation, operational efficiency, business development, those are all skills that companies still have in demand, and increasingly so. Hi, I'm Kory, head of economics for the Americas at LinkedIn, and you're watching Macro Talk with Hope.
Kory, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
I always say like us as if there were more than just, it's just me. But it's the royal me and the royal us. We are talking a couple of hours, or at the end of the day, today is jobs report day. So I wanted to start quickly there. Were there any interesting findings as you were looking through the data for March that you think are really telling that we should be really closely monitoring as an indication of where things might go in the labor market?
Right now, we see the labor market's actually holding up pretty steady. So we don't need to worry so much about payrolls. They're very volatile month to month right now. Say they were up in January because of a seasonal adjustment issue. They were down in February. We had strikes. They're up back up again. And it's pretty much driven by healthcare, construction, and leisure and hospitality. So payrolls are going to do what they're going to do. They're very much driven by one or two industries every month. We really should be paying more attention to the unemployment rate. And what we saw in this report is when we look at those groups where we would worry their unemployment rate would start to show more deterioration before the rest of the market, 16 to 19, 20 to 24, Black employees, their unemployment rates all went down. So we saw that across the board. Of course, for high school graduates, we did see their unemployment rate tick up a bit, but across most demographics, unemployment held steady, which tells us that the labor market is still holding up. Of course, it's very fragile. If you are only adding jobs for the most part in one industry, that's not to say it's a healthy labor market, but we are still holding up, and the labor market's been under immense pressure the last few years.
I feel like the subtitle of every news story at this point, whenever we see the jobs number, is like, just talk about healthcare first. What percent was actually in healthcare, what wasn't? That's my own sense going forward. How do you think we should better report on this month-to-month data set? Not only is it volatile, like you said, but also it's not only so backwards looking, but it's, in the middle of the month, which doesn't account for, some of the things that happened in March.
So we got up to about March 13th, and the Strait of Hormuz was closed around March 2nd. So we got a little bit of data there, but not enough really to move the needle or make a difference, and not during the time where we start to see energy prices peak, which happened much later in the month. So we really ought to start focusing more on those ratios: the unemployment rate, the employment to population ratio, the labor force participation rate. When the labor market is robust, it brings people in. People join the labor market. They want to work and take advantage of those opportunities there. We haven't seen much momentum there. When we look at pay is not enough to draw people into the market. It's running pretty steady. We haven't really seen much acceleration in wage growth. It's all just sort of running at pace, just enough to keep the unemployment rate steady.
One of the things that I thought was interesting was that there was a decline among 20 to 24-year-olds. This decrease in the labor force driven by this age group, does that concern you at all? I was emailing with someone that you probably know, Heather Long, the chief economist of the Navy Federal Credit Union. This is something I asked her as well. So I'd love for you to also weigh in on this decline among 20 to 24-year-olds specifically.
We're talking about the labor force participation rate for 20 to 24-year-olds. So a lot of that decline in labor force participation for 20 to 24-year-olds is coming from women. So we see that younger women are actually leaving the labor force, or they're not joining the labor force as much as they were in the recent past. So that's really what's driving it down. Of course, there's been this long run decline for young men that we've seen. We can go back 30 years, 40 years, and we can just see that decline. But it's really the fact that we haven't seen as many young women joining the workforce to offset this structural decline in young men not participating.
Well, what is leading to this trend?
There are probably a couple of factors. One, we saw a lot of women join the workforce, especially young women, over the last few years because there was a lot more flexibility. On LinkedIn, remote job postings peaked at about 1 in 5. Now we're looking at a world where all flexible job postings, remote and hybrid, is only about 1 in 5. So you don't even have 10% of job postings that are remote anymore. So that pullback in flexibility for new roles that we've seen is probably leading to some folks to change their mind about when and how they're going to go into the labor market. We've also seen rising childcare costs as well. Those have been way outpacing inflation. So if you're young and you're thinking about starting a family, you might be better off staying home financially because the cost of childcare is just so significant. And of course, there's just the overall slowness in the labor market. What draws people in is when real wages are rising, your wages are outpacing inflation. It's a good deal for you to
Hmm.
work. And there are plenty of opportunities there because suppose you get on a job and you don't like it, you'll have the opportunity to move again as opposed to needing to leave the labor force and then re-enter. So all these decisions are weighing on young folks right now who are thinking about entering the labor force, and they're particularly acute for young women.
This seems like something that we should probably track pretty closely. If younger women aren't joining the labor force, is that because they're also finding other kinds of work that's not captured in this data? Or how do we accurately measure, like, even, let's say, their spending power? And we do know that that is a significant target market for marketers to try to sell into. What should we make of this trend, specifically amongst young women who are not entering the labor force at the same rate as in the past?
If we do see childcare costs become contained, see the labor market start to pick up a little bit, these things start to settle down, and we still don't see young women re-entering the workforce, then we really should worry because there might be something there that's a bit more structural. And we know that women are disproportionately exposed to things like AI. They're disproportionately exposed to childcare costs. So their costs aren't fully picked up when we look at just that CPI number. Their costs are actually going to be different from their individual perspective. So if we don't start to see those level out, those costs that they face, we don't see the labor market start to level out, it's going to be difficult to tell whether it's the case that is it the labor market or is there something else deeper that we need to worry about. But if we do see the labor market start to level out, I expect that we will see more young women coming back into the workforce if there's more opportunity, if there's more flexibility.
What did you mean by AI being a disproportionate factor on young women?
So when we look at which jobs have exposure that are more exposed to AI, because on LinkedIn we can track what skills are required for which job. And when we look at those jobs, there are jobs that are disproportionately that women are traditionally in. You think about paralegal roles, administrative roles. There tend to be more women in these roles where they're just have more exposure to AI. It's not to say that AI is what's displacing them right now, but we would worry if we start to see the economy pick up and we don't see folks taking these roles.
So I guess that's not something that I've really heard talk about a lot in stories, unless I'm missing something. Am I missing something?
We do talk about it as
So
economists.
I'm missing something. So I'm missing something. Is the media talking about it? Because I go on CNBC every day, and I don't think I've seen this story.
I have seen a few folks talk about it. When we think about we talk a lot about young people, for example. We know young people have disproportionate exposure based on what they do. It's just the case that certain groups of certain demographics, young people, women, they tend to be in roles where there's generally more exposure of what AI can do.
Well, the other group of workers that are being hurt during what Heather is calling kind of a hiring recession. I don't know if you agree with that term, hiring recession.
We call it a
Um,
hiring slowdown.
Hiring. Okay, so she's calling it a recession. You're calling it a slowdown. Are they synonymous, or are they slightly different in nuance?
I think a recession is slightly different. There's a very clear understanding of what a recession is from the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's a sustained contraction in economic activity over time. If you were to apply it to hiring, you would say it's a sustained contraction in hiring. But if that's the case, then we've been in a hiring recession for 3 years, which is why I don't really use the term, because a 3-year recession in hiring sounds very extreme. What we've really just seen is this gradual slowdown since rates started to go up, and it's been ongoing, and we haven't really seen the end of it.
You think there's any appetite for a podcast where economists battle each other on nuanced wording like this?
You just have to go on various platforms and you'll see it. It's already
In the
happening.
comments? Okay. That's
Already
not
happening
my
in the comments.
all right. It's not my feed, but maybe now I'm going to go hunt through your comments and see.
This is
Um,
why people don't love talking to economists. You talk to 5 of them, you get 5 different answers.
I mean, I do. I think that you get the full picture, I think but But I'm digressing. The other thing that she pointed out was young people, but also African Americans are also being hurt the most in this hiring slowdown, hiring recession. Why is that also the case right now? What are some specific factors? Is it maybe the same as for young women, or are they different?
It often has to do with the jobs that people do and what they are exposed to. And there's also some historical patterns. So we had about 10 years of progress in the Black unemployment rate. It was very, very much low around the peak of 2022. And that progress that we had gained over, over a decade was wiped out in a few months with COVID. So we've always seen this big disparity between the Black unemployment rate and the overall unemployment rate. What's been concerning there for me is the unemployment rate among Black women in particular. We always have seen it elevated among Black men, but Black women, they tend to have, a lot of them tend to have college education now. They're a very college educated group, and we have seen this slowdown and this, you could say, a bit of a downturn among college educated workers, and I think that's disproportionately affected Black women.
So outside of some of those weaker areas and areas of concern, what have been maybe more of the surprising upside, to the volatility, if there is any upside to volatility, especially when we're talking about the labor market?
Even in a labor market like this, there are, of course, bright spots. There are areas where there's ongoing growth and there's areas where things are improving. So we just start with where we see ongoing growth. Of course, healthcare. That's been really the star of the labor market the
Hmm.
last few years. We've also seen a lot of gains for workers who don't have college degrees because leisure and hospitality has done quite well. It's slowed down, it's more volatile these days, but over the last few years, their unemployment rate came down significantly. And that I feel like was that was a missed story for sure. So we talked a lot about how unemployment was rising for recent grads, but we didn't really say much about how for other folks who weren't recent college grads, their unemployment rate went down significantly and they made strong gains in their real wages.
The other last sort of big data point that I found fascinating was the fact that, again, I'm not trying to pit you guys against each other. I'm just trying to bring in the other reporting that I've been doing today. Heather really also found it notable that we now have 5 generations in the labor force at the same time, and that she thinks maybe some of the reasons for younger people having a harder time getting in is that you've got people, who are, near 80, who are still working. Don't know if you have any specific thoughts around this or observations, or if you've kind of projected out what that looks like as the economy, as the country, grays more.
I think part of what Heather is getting at is that there is a lack of churn right now in the labor force. When we look on LinkedIn, about 60% of companies prior to the pandemic had one worker coming in the door and one worker going out. That's just churn, regular movement in the labor market. Someone leaves their job, they open up a new seat sometimes for a new person to take that role. And that has dropped down to about in the low 50s. So we were looking at 60 plus percent. Now we're looking at the low 50s of the number of companies that have one worker coming in and one worker going out every month. So we're not adding a ton of jobs anymore, but what's really killing folks getting into the labor market is just that there isn't a lot of reallocation. We don't see people moving around enough to create those new opportunities. So if someone's joining a firm, they're staying in an entry level role, maybe they took that role for 2 years and usually would move on. They're probably sticking around for 3 or 4.
Does the economic data show that companies are investing more in technology than in people?
I think companies are still investing very much in people. We still see that there's hiring happening. It's just not at the same pace of what we're used to, definitely not 3 years ago, and not what we saw prior to the pandemic. So the LinkedIn hiring rate, when we track people changing their profiles over time, that's down 20% compared to prior to the pandemic, but it is not zero. We still see companies hiring workers. When I'm in rooms with executives and I ask them, has anyone replaced a single worker with AI? No one ever raises their hand because they're still using their workforce. They still need them. Of course, companies are relentlessly focused on efficiency at the moment, so they're not expanding their workforces aggressively, but you still need labor if you're going to make anything.
Well, on that note, do you think any of them are lying, or do you think that some of the headlines that we've seen, for example, Jack Dorsey, that block the huge announcement that they made to cut people because of AI? Do you think that just gets too much attention, oversized attention than what's really happening day to day, which is, according to this room that you were in too, like that people are actually not firing people for AI?
It certainly may be the case that there's anticipation around AI. And so companies aren't hiring as aggressively because they anticipate that AI can do some of these things. But if you just look at the broad set of survey evidence where we're asking, where folks are going out asking CEOs, how is their workforce changed as a result of AI? A lot of them are saying, not very much. We're anticipating in the next few years maybe we won't need to hire as much. And then of course there are going to be some companies that are likely to hire more aggressively because AI is creating capacity for them and enabling them to grow and expand. And so they're going to need more sales folks, more marketers, more folks who can go out there and capture the market for them. So it's not going to be as simple as, yes, we have AI, I don't need workers anymore. It's going to be complicated depending on the particular business of whether that means that their headcount shrinks, stays the same, or gets bigger.
But why do you think that they are coming out with, manifestos and blog posts and saying, look, we really feel like this is a bet on AI and we need to take this move right now? And, I feel like we're living in two different timelines. Like you go on X and everybody on X, at least on my timeline, is all in on AI. And then you've got fear and anxiety on my LinkedIn and on my Instagram feeds.
I think we're just at a very pivotal moment in the labor market right now. It's been slowing down for 3 years. We have low unemployment that keeps the economy going. They have money to spend and they have jobs. But we don't see any momentum. And when you've been living in this world without momentum for 3 years, that hurts confidence. And we see that in all of our surveys of our members. If we ask Gen Z, how are they feeling about the labor market? 2 in 5 say that they have been applying more than they ever have, and they're hearing back less. When we ask members, how do they feel? Do they feel prepared for their job search ahead? 3 in 4 say, actually, no, I don't. And about half of them say, well, I need to figure out how to reskill this year so that I'll be more competitive. And it's just a much more competitive market at the end of the day. Since 2022, we've seen the number of applicants per job on LinkedIn double. It's more competitive. If you're a young person, there's more people coming out of college every day. We're continuing to see more folks coming out of college. It's just creating a more competitive environment. And we've been in this slowdown for 3 years. That weighs on confidence, that weighs on sentiment. And then something like AI comes along and creates a lot of uncertainty. And I think that's what we're feeling.
Well, I mean, doesn't that line up that the ChatGPT launch was about 3 years ago, like in November?
So was the rise in real interest rates. That happened around the exact same time.
So it's at the same time. That's so really hard to divorce.
It's very difficult. People write dissertations on how to disentangle these factors.
What does it show? I mean, look, I took like one econometrics class, okay? So like I remember vaguely having to weight the factors. Is there agreement in the community of economists of where the driving force really originated?
There's a fierce debate right now. If you asked me a year ago, I would say the folks who were saying that AI is displacing jobs, they were winning that debate. I don't think they're in the winning position at the moment. And from our perspective and what we see on LinkedIn, we think that this slowdown is very much driven by economic conditions because we don't see a lot of daylight between entry-level and experienced workers in terms of hiring. If it was going to be AI, the expectation, at least of one of the theories around AI, is that it's going to hit entry-level workers because their work is more routine. There's less complementarities with interpersonal skills that they would need or acquire over time, or their ability to manage stakeholders that you learn on the job. They don't have those particular skills at the same level, so they're likely to get hit hardest. But we see, when we look at hiring, it's down about 7% year over year overall, 6% year over year for entry level, 6% year over year for more senior workers, and it's those middle managers who are getting hit the hardest right now. It's actually not entry level.
Oh, okay. So that's because they want to get rid of bloat, right? Some of these companies, like they're trying to cut out the fat.
There's a relentless focus on efficiency, and sometimes efficiency means that you reorganize the company and you reduce the layers.
Okay, so what you're saying is it will hurt entry level in the future a little bit more than what's happening now, which is the middle is being hurt the most.
That's the expectation. I don't think the economics of it are a little bit more complicated. So you could imagine a world where AI creates this amazing product that creates more demand for entry level workers because they may be doing a particular role that no one else can do. Suppose that you need people to actually go out. Suppose your product is something to do with college campuses. You need someone to go out and actually meet the students, see them, be there and be present. And you often will want someone who's younger who can relate to college students. So you could imagine in a role there, entry level workers who were working as campus ambassadors could potentially go up. And we've actually seen a bit of that on LinkedIn. We've seen campus ambassadors be one of those areas where we've seen a bit of a boost this year. Probably it's just recovering from a slowdown over the last few years. And also there's a bit of a boost coming from the fact that we're doing more things in person than what we were in the past.
But it sounds like the key to understanding if AI is going to be an enabler of jobs is how much does whatever this AI that you've built or that you've bought will enable in-person communications and engagement. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
That's certainly going to be a part of it. Is how much is the work that you're doing complementary? How much of it is human? And when we look at what skills are on the rise, yes, AI is at the top, but these operational efficiency and costs and these more cost saving type skills are important. But really that human interaction, that interpersonal touch, that becomes way more important in a world where AI takes on a lot of the technical abilities. Anyone can think about a job where they've worked with someone who's very technical and very tech savvy, but really needs to work on their interpersonal skills. And so for those folks, when you have AI that can do a lot of the coding, do a lot of the technical, do a lot of the logistics, that's where you start to see those gaps. And so folks who can fill those gaps are likely to have a big advantage going forward.
How do you think about your own career? How do you think your life would have been different if you had started your economics journey and all your grad school like now?
I didn't start out wanting to be an economist. I started out wanting to be a journalist.
Oh, get out of town.
Yes.
Wait, so what happened? How did the paths diverge?
I looked and saw that all of these really good journalists had degrees, bachelor's degrees in economics. And then once I got into it, I got bitten by the social science bug and I kept going.
So I have a degree in both. Did not do well. I did better in journalism than economics, but I actually did major in both. So I hear you. I mean, they're very similar. We're talking about people. We're studying behaviors. We're trying to understand sort of what's going on. So I love that. But if you were to think about when you were going through grad school and especially getting to your PhD, had you had the tools that we have today back then, how do you think your education would have been different? Like, how could it have changed if you, or even people, you know, I don't know if you're talking to students now, how is it different now being an economist with all these AI tools?
I think there's certainly some efficiency gains and time savings. I think you maybe some years ago you would need a research assistant to get things done. Maybe you don't need as much research assistance as you did. Maybe lit reviews can go a little bit faster because you often have to review the literature and figure out to make sure that what you're doing is actually novel. But I think a lot of the bread and butter of education and teaching and learning is actually the same. AI is a general purpose technology. So the idea is that it's going to be as general as using a cell phone or using a calculator. And so it's figuring out what are the right applications for you. Of course, there are folks who will also say it's totally revolutionary and going to change everything. But I think the way we're using it today, when we look at actual usage today, it is very much one of those tools where you figure out what's the right use case for you. And doing research, yes, you can start to get some sense of how to write things, where to look, but there is nothing worse in academia than publishing something that is wrong and potentially from an AI hallucination. So even if you get your whole dissertation written by AI, you're going to have to go through and check every single line.
Yeah. It also sounds like anything, you know, related to publishing and journalism is a certain part of it. Okay, we talked a little bit about the jobs market as of March 2026. I want to get to the data that is being released today, which is the Grads Guide, the 10 fastest growing job titles for career starters, according to your data, your research, include number 1, generative AI engineer, number 2, marketing coordinator, number 3, recruitment assistant, and number 4, legal specialist. I wonder, is there any commonality across these? And what jumped out to you in terms of this list compared to the lists that you've had in the past?
When you look at LinkedIn's jobs on the rise, skills on the rise, and grads guide, what's at the top of every single list? It's AI. There is so much momentum in the AI economy right now, and not just for pure AI roles, but sometimes AI enabled roles. Think about data annotators, the folks who do the labeling to help train the models. We've seen over the last few years 300,000 jobs created for those roles alone. So AI and AI enabled roles certainly have had a lot of momentum, and we see those opportunities even for folks who are just entering the labor market. And
Well,
when we look at the other roles, a lot of them actually represent a change in momentum. So tech slowed down significantly in 2023. We've seen it start to level out, and it was actually hiring was up a bit last year, year over year, and it's flat so far this year. So it's still slow. Is not as much momentum in tech as we saw 4 years ago in 2022, in the heydays of 2021, 2022. But there's increasingly a little bit more momentum there, and that you see early career folks finding more opportunities. And broadly across the labor market, operational roles have had a lot more support and momentum than R&D roles outside of AI. So IT engineers, they've been running fairly slow, but we've seen finance, legal, particularly business development and sales. Those are running relatively strong compared to the other roles because businesses are, again, they're focused on operational efficiency. So they're looking for folks to come in and deliver on that front.
and they're looking for new ideas, business development, sales. They're looking for the next thing.
New markets.
Something else that jumped out to me is, and you said this too, operations. I mean, coordinator, assistant, specialist. I mean, I understand these are for career starters, so these are, more junior sort of titles. But this is like work that, like coordination. I mean, AI hasn't really gotten there yet for people, it sounds like, and assistance and just kind of being there in person. Is that the right way to look at this set of just on the face of the titles themselves?
As you mentioned, so they're junior titles, so they're always going to have something like specialist, coordinator. But really, when we think about the functions, that's key. We still
Hmm.
see some momentum in HR. A lot of those folks are recruiters. And that's because we have seen the labor market level out and be steadier over the last few years. In 2022, 2023, those were the roles that were falling the fastest because they were slowing down. The labor market was slowing down significantly. There wasn't a ton of hiring and momentum there. But we've started to see things start to pick up. Even when we look at temporary help services, that's an area where the slowdown was very sharp. We saw a big reduction in folks working in temp help, and that's actually started to level out, maybe even come up a bit so far this year. And so we are just seeing this leveling out. Things are running slow, but they're still running steady, and entry level workers are finding these small pockets of momentum and they're moving into them.
Something that you already mentioned, industries, technology is I guess at the top. Is that always where technology falls on this list? Is the top for creating new jobs?
Not always. A few years ago, technology was not at the top of the list. It was areas like utilities and construction, which are still running quite strong. The LinkedIn hiring rate for utilities and construction, those are actually about on pace with pre-pandemic levels. And of course, healthcare is one of those areas as well, and education, because we still have a massive teacher shortage in the US. And so those areas have still been running pretty strong. They've slowed down, but they're still running relatively strong even in the jobs report that we saw, the last jobs report. Construction added 26,000 jobs. It's not consistently adding jobs, but it is adding jobs when you contrast that with areas like professional services, which is a huge industry which is not adding jobs. So there's certainly these big areas we've seen over the last few years that are continuing to run hot. And then there are the areas that are leveling out. Technology, information and media, financial services, those are the areas that are starting to steady and level out, and they're getting more momentum. And that's why we're seeing more early career workers finding roles there.
Technology being at the top, San Francisco's top number one fastest growing region. So that seems to align. when you were going through the research and you were looking at pulling out the top line and analyzing all this, was there anything that was sort of non-obvious to you? Was there anything that made you like fall out of your chair or, adjust your glasses and to have to look twice in this data?
I would say that I was just surprised to see how strong sales is even at the entry level, because there's so much focus on efficiency and finding revenue that you would think that there would be a big skewness towards experienced sales folks. But it does turn out that we still need folks who are coming in at that entry level who may not have sharpened their interpersonal skills as much as someone who's been in the labor market for 10 years, but they're still very much needed, especially at a time where companies are trying to defend and expand their opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. The other thing that it surprised me, and this is something that maybe hasn't surprised you, but more than half of global Gen Z workers agree to the statement, I switched my job seeking focus from full time to freelance, contract, or consultancy advisor roles, 51.3%. And this was more than any other generation. So square that with some of the other things we are talking about earlier on. Maybe it's all in the same story. Maybe there's some pockets of outliers. But what did this say to you? Was it surprising to you when you saw this number?
It was not surprising to me that the creator generation are looking for opportunities all across the board. We've seen a 60% rise in LinkedIn members over the last year, adding founder to their profile. And we know that the creator economy is very much driven by folks who are under the age of 30. So it came to no surprises me that they're freelancing. Some of that is probably focused on content creation. And so this is a generation that has had revenue opportunities that I didn't have when I was that age. And they're certainly taking advantage of them, and they're using them to bridge their careers, and potentially that can expand their careers and become the focus of their career.
Yeah, and I think storytelling, I've heard anecdotally, is, a skill that a lot of companies are looking for. I guess that would sort of align. And then the good news that you have seen as a complement to this is that contract work has become a core hiring strategy. Lay out some of the reasons companies are looking more at contract work.
If you think about what's happened the last few years, when things were slowing down pretty sharply in 2022, 2023, what did companies want? They wanted more optionality. They wanted to increase their set of options. And so contract work actually pivoted. Of course, there was the initial pullback, but then they pivoted more. And so we've seen the share of job postings for contract work actually increase on LinkedIn over the last couple of years. And we, of course, know in 2021, 2022, we just couldn't get enough labor. So there was tons and tons and tons of contract work being signed because you couldn't get people on full time. And actually moving from contract to contract became very popular a few years ago. And so people have actually stuck to that model. It stayed. And we saw a bit of a drift that way before the pandemic, but the pandemic really accelerated that shift of people taking autonomy in their careers, using contract work to control their hours, to control their flexibility, and just have more autonomy over their lives. And even today, businesses now, they want to be able to control their costs better.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be able to expand out quickly in a world where technology is moving fast, and then potentially scale down very quickly when there's concerns about uncertainty in the economy.
Well, I think it leaves the healthcare question, very open for some people. A lot of people want a full-time job just for the healthcare. I don't know if this is sort of in your wheelhouse, but is there something that can be done to support these more consultancy, advisor role, contract work, freelance workers to help them with healthcare costs? Are you seeing companies maybe even offer some of that as part of the contract? Or is it, obviously part of the contract is that they can, reduce their own costs, so they don't really have to offer it?
I haven't personally seen any evidence of that, but I can imagine that for companies who do want workers that are flexible, where they can come on and come off on different contracts, if they want to have a competitive edge, that's likely to be something that will move the needle. If you are offering those benefits, you probably will be able to snatch up the best contractors, assuming you're also offering competitive pay.
In terms of skills, I'm curious if you've seen other changes on the list from year to year, and if those are also different for what employers are searching for when it comes to level of experience.
We've certainly seen these operational efficiency revenue generating roles on the list before, but they've really surged in terms of the skills that are on the rise. And that just tells us where businesses are today, and they're likely to continue to look for those going forward. So if you are focused on revenue generation, efficiency, business development, those are all skills that companies still have in demand and increasingly so.
Okay, when you come to the office or you're on your computer and you've got access to all this LinkedIn data, I'm curious, like if you have one particular set of data that you look at religiously, that you are constantly checking, and I want to know if there is that, and if so, what is it, and why does it capture your attention so much?
I will tell you, I look at everything. I want to know everything that's going on. There are all kinds of different signals that are interesting and important, but I really want to see how they all fit together. So I'm really trying to get that full picture of what's going on. I want to see the data that aligns with my view. I want to see the data that contradicts my view. So I really want to see everything. But I regularly check the LinkedIn hiring rate because it does seem to lead the job openings and labor turnover survey hiring rate a bit by a month or two. And it
Mm.
is one of those sharp indicators that tells you what's likely to evolve going forward. Because what can businesses turn on and turn off the easiest? It's hiring. It's not, we talk about layoffs a lot, but it's not so simple to lay off workers, and it's more difficult depending on what state you're in. But hiring is something where employers can turn off the tap pretty readily. So it is giving us some forward-looking information. So I'm always sure to check that. But I love looking at any and all indicators to get some sense of how people are seeing things because each data set is unique and tells you something interesting.
No, totally. I don't want any indicators to feel like left out or less loved. It was more when you open your phone or when you have your database and your dashboard up, like what is the first thing that you go to regularly and maybe religiously and it sounds like it's the hiring rate.
It's definitely the hiring rate. And I
Any
don't
other
look at anything on my phone because church and state.
Oh, okay. Well, that's really good. I'm also curious if you track the number of people with the badges, if they have the open to work, if I'm hiring, I mean, most people don't keep that super up to date. So I assume it's probably not the freshest like indicator of things to come or the state, but I am curious, like if there's any particular change in a drastic way on that activity level.
We do track those activities, particularly open to work, and
Mm-hmm.
that has risen pretty meaningfully over the last few years. So as the unemployment rate has drifted up, we have seen the number of folks listing open to work drift up as well.
And fractional workers. That was something I was tracking about 2 years ago. I mean, there was like a huge explosion in people putting fractional in there. Has fractional turned to founder?
That could be the case that fractional has turned to founder, but I really think that founder is very much just a product of a couple of things. One, it's a slow labor market. People are not waiting for a job, they are creating one of their own. I think that's really one of the biggest factors right now. And then two, it may be the case that AI is lowering some of those barriers to entry into becoming a founder. I don't know necessarily what the usage is for businesses who are starting up of AI, but you can imagine that figuring out how to have a business license, trying to figure out what's the right market fit, what's the total addressable market. Those are areas where this technology can process a lot of information for you and do that in a short amount of time. So those barriers to entry to getting started might be lower as a result of folks using the technology, even just when it's freeware, the free versions. So I think those are really driving folks towards becoming founders. Of course, there might be some folks who are moving for saying fractional to founders, but I really think it's very much that economic circumstance that's driving it.
All right. Well, I hope that we'll talk more later this year as well. But before we end, is there anything that you wanted to discuss? Is there anything we haven't talked about as it relates to the report from March, the jobs report, or the grads guide, or just anything that you're seeing out there that makes you like super frustrated and wish that we would talk less about or talk more about?
I think we need to do a better job at distinguishing a couple of things. There are certainly areas where there's a lot of opportunity, and those are your big healthcare, professional services, leisure and hospitality. For young workers, those make up about half of the workforce. So that's volume. There's a lot of opportunities there. And then there's momentum. And you need momentum in order to have a shot at moving forward because that's where growth comes from. It comes from momentum. And we often don't really make that distinction between, yes, there's just a lot of jobs here because these are big industries versus the industries that are actually moving forward. And I think that's important for young people to know when they're doing their homework and doing their research. You don't want to get into a big industry that isn't moving forward, that's even
Mm.
potentially shrinking. You want to get in somewhere that's got momentum, that's got a good tailwind behind it, and is going to be driving forward into the future. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind when we're trying to give advice and guide young folks where to look. And that's what the Grads Guide is focused on. Where is their momentum? Where does it look like things are moving forward, and how are they moving forward? So those are the areas where, if you look over the last few years, there might be opportunities to get into. Maybe they're not the areas that are the biggest. So technology is not the biggest industry. We talk about it as though it is. It is adding the most value to the economy, but we aren't even talking about 5% of the workforce. So there's not going to be a job in tech for everyone, but there is momentum there and there's increasingly opportunities there. So we have to make that distinction for folks because they go and they look in tech and they're like, there aren't a lot of jobs here. I'm very frustrated. Well, of course, it's not the most of the workforce. Most of the workforce is working elsewhere. But if you are able to land one of those jobs, you're in an area where there's momentum. You've gotten experience. You've learned how the industry works, and you can potentially have a great career.
But Kory, I mean, you don't have that in this list either. I was going to ask you to sum up, like, on this list. Is this are these momentum lists? Top 10 fastest growing job titles, top fastest growing industries.
Yes.
Are these are all momentum? Does that mean that everything here is also low volume, or where are the high volume? Where is the intersection? Is what I'm asking.
So the intersection of high volume, high momentum. So for high volume, it's healthcare. Healthcare has been slowing over the last few years, so there isn't really a ton of momentum there at the moment, but there are definitely strong factors. We're getting older, we're living longer. So we may not see momentum on healthcare right now. So it's not on the Grads Guide list this year as one of those industries. But going forward, at some point, it's going to definitely get back on that list.
So healthcare is volume, low momentum, and then you've got fast momentum in these, but tech, real estate, financial services, utilities, construction, they're all small volume. So that's why it's more competition. People aren't hearing back. And then these titles, they all sound like they are high momentum right now and probably low volume. Is that the right way to summarize it?
So they're high momentum, and then obviously sales is also high volume.
Right. Okay. So that's also where there's an intersection. Well, I think you should add that because I think that would be great. Because I mean, we're just reporting off of things that we see, and we see big numbers and we think, wow, like momentum. But to your point, there is a lot of nuance. What else do you think more people should really pay attention to when there are differing views in the world of economists and these conversations that are happening in your own circles?
We should remember that it's a social science, and sciences have debates. It takes time to figure things out. We don't know today to what extent AI is going to impact the labor market, where and how. We have some ideas. We have some sense of what's impacting the labor market today. But going forward, it's still very much open for debate. So when you see a headline that says AI is taking jobs, and then you see the headline the next week that says it's not AI at all, that's the science working itself out. And sometimes it does it in a messy way and very publicly, but we kind of have to get comfortable with that and know that it's still very much up for grabs and debate about what's going to happen going forward.
I love it. I think it's great. I love talking to economists personally. I feel that you guys always can, ground the conversation and give that big picture perspective. Very last question for me. If we're out, if we're, having a drink, enjoying the sunshine, what makes you freak out? Like, is there one particular data point that if you saw it, or a headline that if you saw it, that it would actually unnerve you, even somebody who studies cycles for a living?
That's a good question. There's not a lot that unnerves me at this
I know
point in my
that's why I
life.
want to know. I was talking to Karen, your colleague, and she's also just, hey, things happen, cycles, and I'm like, that is not the way the rest of us live our lives, and so that's why I want to know, like, what would throw you off?
What would likely set alarm bells for me is if we really saw a significant rise in the unemployment rate within a few months. And by significant, I don't mean 5%. I mean 8%, 10%. And within the span of a few months, that would set alarm bells for me. And we did see some of that happen during the Great Recession. And that really did set off alarm bells because it was a very sharp rise. And then, of course, COVID was another instance where we just saw unemployment just shoot up within, not even within months, in weeks, we saw unemployment go up wildly. And now it came back down pretty fast too.
Right.
So that certainly should calm folks down. It was really this temporary rise. But when you see a very sharp rise in unemployment, it's usually not hiring, it's usually layoffs because hiring sort of deteriorates unemployment over time, makes it rise gradually, but layoffs is the one thing that can make it rise very sharply. So if we do see this very sharp rise in unemployment claims, that's when you would worry. And we get those weekly. So we get a weekly barometer on how those are tracking. And if you saw initial claims shoot through the roof, assuming it's not a data error, that would be definitely concerning because that means that they don't have money and they don't have jobs and they don't have money to spend. That slows down the economy and potentially very quickly.
That's right. All right. I'm looking for that headline. Don't freak out until. This is what I'm trying to get after. It was so great to hang out with you. Thank you for spending your Friday today with me. Anything else?
I would say generally don't freak out. You can't solve problems when you're in a state of panic. And so it's always good to just try to have a sober look at things, look at all of your options, weigh them, and figure out what your next steps are. And the next step you take, if you're struggling with your career today, if you're struggling with getting your business off the ground, the steps you take don't have to be big. You just need them to take you in the right direction.
I love that. Great note to end on. Kory, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.